In a quiet neighborhood where everyone takes pride in their lawns and decorum, my peaceful life as a parent took an unexpected turn. It all started when my daughter, playing in our backyard, accidentally kicked her soccer ball into the neighboring yard. Unbeknownst to her, that yard belonged to the infamous Karen, a self-appointed HOA enforcer who took her role a bit too seriously. Karen, armed with her clipboard and a keen eye for rule violations, wasted no time in reporting the incident. She claimed it was a breach of HOA rules and, in a fit of overzealousness, called in the enforcers to investigate. Before I knew it, a couple of HOA security officers were climbing over my fence and barging into my yard. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't just any homeowner. I had spent years as a Secret Service agent, protecting presidents and dignitaries. My training kicked in as I assessed the situation. Quickly understanding the urgency of the breach, as the HOA enforcers approached, I calmly introduced myself, explaining my background and the seriousness of their intrusion. The look on their faces was priceless, as they realized they had crossed a line they never should have. My firm demeanor and the sheer absurdity of the situation left them speechless. Rather than escalating the confrontation, I chose to have a light-hearted conversation, sharing a few humorous stories from my days in the Secret Service. The tension eased, and we found common ground in our shared desire to keep the neighborhood safe, just in very different ways. By the end of our chat, the HOA enforcers left my yard with a newfound respect. They learned that while rules are important, it's equally vital to approach situations with reason and understanding. And as for Karen, she was left to ponder whether her next HOA complaint was worth the potential consequences of crossing paths with a former protector of the president. The air in the cul-de-sac was usually thick with the drone of suburban tranquility, but today it was taut, vibrating with barely suppressed confrontation. Marcus Thorne looked up from trimming his prize-winning roses. He was a man whose presence, even in a stained t-shirt and gardening gloves, commanded a second look. His shoulders were still broad and straight, carrying the silent weight of 2 decades spent in the Secret Service, a significant portion of that time guarding presidents. He moved with a precision that was now second nature, a habit born of watching every shadow, every flicker of movement, for a threat. The threat today was considerably less lethal than a sniper, but perhaps more infuriating, the Homeowners Association, HOA, compliance team. The team consisted of 2 people. First, Brenda, the HOA president. She was a woman who saw the subdivision rules as a sacred, unyielding text, and whose personal mantra seemed to be escalate first. Second, Gary, a nervous, undersized man Brenda had hired as the HOA's chief enforcement officer. Marcus had been fighting them for weeks over a small, custom-built treehouse in his backyard. His daughter, Lila, age 8, had helped design it, a project they'd bonded over. The HOA claimed it violated the permanent structure height and visibility covenant. Marcus had countered with blueprints, city permits, and a pointed letter from his lawyer. "Mr. Thorne," Brenda announced, her voice pitched high with self-importance as she reached the edge of his property. "Your defiance of the final notice is unacceptable. The treehouse must be removed today." Marcus kept his clipper steady. "It's fully compliant, Brenda. Read the city's building code, not your selectively highlighted rule book." The trespass. The real trouble started half an hour later. Marcus had retreated inside for a glass of water, leaving the yard gate latch unlocked. Lila was in the treehouse reading a book. From his kitchen window, Marcus saw the unbelievable Brenda. Holding a laminated clipboard like a shield, gave a sharp nod to Gary. Gary, hesitating for only a moment, slipped the thin, brass-plated HOA key into the yard gate lock, a key they were explicitly forbidden from using except in a documented emergency situation, like a fire. Since the latch was simply a pull ring, the lock was unnecessary and the move was pure. Petty aggression. The gate swung open. "We are entering the property to post a final physical removal notice on the structure itself," Brenda declared, not to Marcus, but to the empty street, as if announcing a minor military operation. Gary stepped onto the manicured lawn. The next step, however, was worse. Gary, perhaps thinking he was being thorough, started walking toward the tree where Lila was. This was no longer about a rule. Marcus's mind didn't process the scene with anger. It processed it with the icy, instant clarity of a threat assessment. Threat. Unauthorized personnel have breached the perimeter and are approaching a protected asset, Lila. Response protocol. Immediate neutralization of the intrusion and securing of the asset. The executive protection response. Marcus moved. He didn't run. He flowed out the back door and onto the lawn. It was the movement of a man who had trained for a decade to put himself instantly between an unknown threat and the most powerful person in the free world. It was efficient, silent, and terrifyingly fast. Gary didn't hear him until the moment Marcus's shadow enveloped him. Gary spun around, mouth already open to protest. But Marcus was past the protest phase. In one fluid motion that would have earned a silent nod from his former training instructors, Marcus executed a textbook control and escort maneuver. The grip. His left hand shot out and clamped firmly, but not violently, around Gary's upper arm. Just above the elbow, a non-painful but absolute point of control. The turn. His right arm went across Gary's back. A gentle push but a clear directive, spinning Gary 180 degrees so the enforcer was facing the open gate. The march. Marcus leaned in close. His voice was a low, controlled rumble, the kind that carried authority without ever needing to be loud. You have breached a protected zone and approached a minor. You are now being escorted off the premises. Gary. The chief enforcement officer was propelled backward in a silent, perfectly straight line toward the gate, his feet scrambling to keep up with the professional momentum. He was utterly helpless, trapped in a vice of muscle memory and training. Brenda, watching this happen, finally lost her self-possession. Marcus, you can't assault an officer of the HOA. Marcus released Gary with a precise little shove just outside the gate. Gary stumbled, wide-eyed and gasping. Marcus stepped over the threshold and faced Brenda, his hands now empty, hanging loosely at his sides. I didn't lay a hand on him in anger, Marcus said, his eyes hard and unwavering. I executed a non-lethal close-quarters control technique to remove an unauthorized person from my property. He paused, letting the silence ring. The key you used, he continued, pointing at the open gate, was an illegal, unwarranted trespass. I have security footage of the entry. I also have 2 decades of documented training in threat assessment, crisis response, and executive protection from the United States Secret Service. Marcus's voice dropped one last octave. Becoming deadly serious, you broke into my yard. You approached my child. Do you understand what my training dictates when a threat approaches a protectee? You are lucky my protocol is to pursue legal recourse first. Now you and your officer will leave my property, and you will not return without a warrant signed by a judge. Brenda stared at him, the bravado completely gone, replaced by a deep, sudden fear. She looked at Gary, whose face was pale. She finally saw not the compliant resident, but the silent, disciplined guardian whose job was to ensure that threats never got close. She stammered, "Well, we're leaving," and backed away, practically dragging Gary down the street. Marcus walked back to the gate, pulled it shut, and flipped the latch. He didn't bother with the lock. He just stood there for a moment, a silhouette of quiet strength against the suburban sky. Aftermath. Up in the treehouse, Lila poked her head out. "Dad, what was that?" Marcus smiled, the intensity draining from his face instantly. "Just a little lesson in boundaries, sweetie. Go back to your book. Your fortress is secure." He knew the legal fight with the HOA wasn't over, but he also knew one thing for certain. Brenda and Gary would never, ever step foot onto his property again. They had poked the former guardian, and they had been precisely, professionally neutralized. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where manicured lawns and white picket fences defined the landscape, I lived with my wife, Emily, and our energetic 6-year-old son, Jake. Our home was a sanctuary, a place filled with laughter and the aroma of freshly baked cookies. As a former Secret Service agent, I had spent years guarding the nation's leaders, navigating high-stakes situations. But now my most important mission was to protect my family and cultivate a sense of security. The incident one sunny afternoon. While I was in the kitchen preparing snacks, the sound of laughter floated in from the backyard. Jake had invited a few friends over, and they were playing heroically in his makeshift fort, a haphazard construction of old blankets, sticks, and lawn chairs. As I watched them through the window, I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. I remembered the countless hours I spent playing outside as a child, using my imagination to create entire worlds. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash followed by a commotion. My heart raced as I rushed to the back door. To my shock, I saw 2 HOA enforcers scaling my fence and stepping into my yard. They were there to enforce a minor infraction regarding Jake's fort. The sight of them dressed in their khaki uniforms and armed with clipboards made my blood boil. "What do you think you're doing?" I called out, my voice steady but firm. They turned, startled by my sudden appearance. One of them, a tall man with a buzz cut, stammered, "We're just checking on the violation. This structure isn't approved." I felt my protective instincts kick in. "This is my home and my son is just playing. You need to leave my property." The confrontation. There was a tense silence as they exchanged glances, unsure of how to proceed. I could sense the realization dawning on them that perhaps they had underestimated the situation. After what felt like an eternity, they mumbled something about needing to follow protocol and retreated, leaving my yard in peace. As they walked away, I felt a mix of triumph and relief. Jake came running up to me, eyes wide with admiration. "Dad, you were so brave." I knelt down, giving him a hug. Sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even if it's just a fort made of sticks. The fallout that night, I couldn't shake the encounter from my mind. I had always believed in the importance of community, but the HOA's heavy-handed approach felt invasive and unjust. I decided to take action. Over the next few days, I began to research the HOA's rules and regulations, digging through the fine print to understand what rights homeowners truly had. I discovered that many neighbors felt similarly trapped by the HOA's stringent regulations. In whispered conversations during neighborhood gatherings, they expressed frustrations about the enforcers' overreach. I realized that I wasn't alone in my fight. Mobilizing the community, with a newfound determination, I organized a community meeting at the local park. I presented my findings, highlighting how the HOA's rules had transformed from guidelines meant to enhance community life into a form of control that stifled creativity and joy. I encouraged everyone to voice their concerns. And as the sun set, the park buzzed with energy. Neighbors shared stories of their own encounters with the HOA. An elderly couple whose garden had been deemed too colorful, and a single mother who was fined for her children's toys left in the yard. The more we spoke, the more we realized that our collective voices could challenge the status quo. Building a coalition over the next few weeks, we formed a coalition called Neighbors for Fairness. Our mission was simple: to advocate for a more lenient and understanding approach from the HOA. We created flyers, held discussions, and even started a petition. Each weekend, we gathered at my house to strategize and share updates. Emily, initially skeptical about my plans, began to see the passion in my eyes and joined in. She used her skills as a graphic designer to create engaging materials for our campaign. Watching her enthusiasm grow inspired me even more. The HOA meeting. After weeks of hard work, we were ready to present our case to the HOA board. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening, and I could feel the tension in the air as we approached the community center. A sense of camaraderie had developed among us, and I knew we had to stand united. As we entered the room, I noticed the board members seated at the front, their expressions serious and unyielding. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "We're here to discuss how the HOA can better serve our community," I began. Looking each board member in the eye, I shared our stories, emphasizing how the strict regulations had affected families and stifled creativity. The room was silent, and I could feel the weight of our words hanging in the air. A turning point. Just as I was about to conclude, an unexpected voice broke the silence. It was Mrs. Henderson, a retired teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years. I've seen this community flourish with kids playing freely, gardening, and being creative. We shouldn't stifle that spirit, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. Her words resonated with many in the room, and soon others began to chime in, sharing their experiences. The atmosphere shifted. It felt as if we were no longer just a group of disgruntled homeowners, but a united front advocating for change. The vote, after what felt like hours, the board members deliberated. Finally, they announced that they would consider our proposal for a review of the HOA guidelines. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. We left the meeting with a sense of hope, knowing that we had made our voices heard. As the weeks passed, the board began to reach out to community members for feedback on potential changes to the regulations. We started to see small adjustments, like allowing for more creative yard decorations and setting up a committee to review complaints before taking action. A new beginning. The summer rolled on, and as Jake played in his fort, I felt a sense of accomplishment. The once quiet neighborhood was buzzing with activity. Families were painting their fences, planting vibrant flowers, and decorating their yards. The sense of community that had been suppressed was finally flourishing. One evening, as I watched Jake and his friends playing, I reflected on the journey we had taken. The encounter with the HOA had ignited a fire within me, pushing me to take a stand not just for my family, but for the entire neighborhood. Conclusion in the end, I realized that my years of guarding presidents had equipped me with more than just security skills. It had instilled in me a deep understanding of the importance of community and the power of standing up for what is right. Our neighborhood was no longer just a collection of houses. It was a vibrant community filled with laughter, creativity, and a newfound sense of belonging. And as I looked at my son, joyfully playing in his fort, I knew that we had created a safe haven for him. A place where he could dream, play, and thrive. Play and thrive.